from that last administration in 6 months, but we're finding ways to take the great start forward to get new investment into universities, and I can reassure the House the war on universities by that administration has ended.
Shall the Secretary of State Alan Mack?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Companies like ours will be less incentivised to grow. That is the conclusion of Paul Taylor, founder of British tech unicorn Thought Machine, which employs over 500 people. Britain is now missing out on new jobs and investment as a direct result of Labour's national insurance jobs tax. But when the Chancellor started punishing our tech sector, the Secretary of State failed to stand up to her. Why?
Secretary of State.
We have put the public finances on a solid footing. Our economy is now in a stable way that has not been the case for 14 years. It is also the case that the party opposite wants all of the benefits of the last budget without saying how they will pay for any of it. And until they do, they will not be taken seriously by anyone, including the business that he references.
Alan Mack.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The truth is Labour is failing our tech workers because they don't care about our tech sector. Last September, Paul said he was very keen to list Thought Machine in London instead of New York, and one of his preconditions before listing is being able to grow the business as much as possible. So why did the Secretary of State allow the Chancellor to make growth harder for Britain's tech sector at this budget?
I think the honourable gentleman missed the investment summit that the government held just before Christmas, at which a record £60 billion was invested into this country, 24 billion of which was AI related. That is almost as much directly into AI than was committed in total in that government's previous investment summit in total. This government is unlocking investment. That government in the previous administration wrecked our economy, wrecked our public services, and failed to get faith in our economy so that foreign companies could invest in this country.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Just in case the House didn't hear, this government is driving innovation with a record £20.4 billion of R&D investment for 25-26, powering an innovation-led economy across the UK. In Staffordshire, UKRI is backing over £29 million in 70 cutting-edge research and innovation projects. A standout example in innovative UK support for Staffordshire Net Zero Skills for Growth project is equipping the country to seize opportunities in the net zero transition.
Thank you. Towns like those in my constituency are key to the economy but can face unique challenges in accessing innovation opportunities. Please could the Minister tell me how she plans to ensure that towns like Stafford and Eccleshall are able to access new jobs, skills, investments and growth opportunities?
Minister.
I thank my honourable friend for that question. The Department has a clear vision to ensure that UK remains at the forefront of global innovation, a place where cutting-edge businesses of all sizes can start and grow and local people have high-quality jobs building on local strengths. And I'm delighted to hear about the new multi-million-pound facility at Newcastle and Stafford College's Stafford campus, supported by £15 million of government investment being built in my honourable friend's constituency, which will welcome learners from September. And this facility will help provide the technical skills businesses need both now and in the future to support regional and national productivity.
Lewis Atkins.
Number 7, Mr. Speaker.
Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. DCIT is leading the charge by establishing the Digital Centre of Government to harness technology and transform our public services. We are committed to improving digital inclusion and accessibility to ensure high-quality online services are available to everyone. And in the coming months, Mr. Speaker, the Department will outline its plans and priorities for Digital Centre and advancing its digital inclusion.
Lewis Atkins.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Sunderland was recently named the UK's smartest city by The Times, and it was a pleasure to welcome the Secretary of State to visit recently. More than 5,000 homes in our city now have assistive technology installed, supporting the independence of older and disabled people to improve their access to care. Can I ask the Minister how the Government plans to build on the example of Sunderland to improve access to public services across the UK?
Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I thank my honourable friend for his question. The government recognises the potential for digital technology to support people to live independently, and we will set new national standards for care technologies and develop trusted guidance so that people who draw on care, their families and care providers can confidently buy what works and get the safest, most effective tech into their homes or services. In addition, Mr. Speaker, we'll be taking forward a range of initiatives in 25-26, including funding more home adaptations, promoting better use of care technologies.
Forward.
Steps is her department taking for older people who don't feel comfortable about utilising technology to access public services?
Minister.
I thank the honourable member for his question. We'd be happy to hear that the public sector body's accessibility regulation requires most public sector organisations to ensure their services are accessible to disabled people and older people by meeting the requirements of the Web Content Accessibility Guidance and by publishing a prescribed format accessibility statement. And the Government Digital Services Accessibility Monitoring Team reviews public sector websites to ensure compliance with the accessibility regulation and support departments to improve their services.
Shadow Minister Dr. Ben Spence.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I welcome her approach to improve access through technology. However, the majority of concerns I and many colleagues receive are from those who cannot use technology. Rather than improve access, for some, technology can act as a barrier. What is her assessment of the impact of digital exclusion in the UK, and in the strategy that she's announced for digital inclusion, will this include digital exclusion at all levels of government?
Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, digital inclusion is a priority for this government, and we have set up the Digital Inclusion and Skills Unit to ensure that everyone has the access, skills and support and confidence to participate in modern digital society, whatever their circumstances. Work is ongoing to develop our approach to digital inclusion and coordinate across government departments, and we hope to announce more on this soon. We will be working closely with third sector, the industry, devolved governments and local authorities to ensure future interventions are targeted and based on individuals' needs.
Right, we come to topicals. Zoe Franklin.
Question 1, Mr. Speaker.
Secretary of State.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, we have seen fear and lies spread about life in Britain. To those who have done little or nothing to combat child sexual abuse are stretching every sinew to jump on that bandwagon. This government is committed to justice for the victims and punishment for the perpetrators of abuse wherever it happens, to ever who commits it. And on that, I pay tribute to the work the Prime Minister and in particular my honourable friend, the member for Birmingham Yardley, did in this regard. The legal codes Ofcom set out last month are the single biggest change to online safety for a generation.
In 2023, the Lords Digital Committee found that 1.7 million households were without internet. With the forthcoming switchover to internet protocol television, would the Minister outline how they're working to ensure that no one is left behind by that switchover?
I'm very grateful for a question. It's incredibly important. Broadcast TV is legally protected until 2034. This government is committed to ensuring audiences can access television in a way that suits them. Too many people are excluded from digital activity through lacking the basic skills. In the not-too-distant future, I'll be launching the Digital Inclusion Plan. I know that she takes cross-party working very seriously. I hope she'll meet with me so I can brief her on that work and involve her ideas as we develop it.
Maggie Shank.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I refer the House to my register of interest. Globally, billions of pounds of investment are flowing into companies creating new technologies to power data centres. Communities across the UK should be sharing this opportunity of well-paid skilled jobs which this investment offers. In Derby, Rolls-Royce are world leaders in the development of small modular reactors. I love Derby. Does the Secretary of State agree with me that they show British innovation at its strongest and would be a dynamic partner for any technology company wishing to invest in the future?
I'm grateful for his question. I do agree, of course, and of course the other side seem to as well. I agree that technological innovation will be the key to move to net zero, and the UK will be at the forefront of that, and SMRs are particularly exciting. I've met with Rolls-Royce. They have a great advocate in the honourable member. I look forward to hearing more from him and seeing how we can support this exciting technology into the future.
Blakeston.
Mr. Speaker, thank you. What steps is the government taking to support pioneering British companies like Cranfield Aerospace Solutions in mid-Bedfordshire in their pursuit of hydrogen-powered flight? And how will the industrial strategy ensure the UK remains a global leader in sustainable aviation technology?
Thank you. He raises a very important point, one that this government is committed to. That's why we increased R&D spending to the highest of any government in this country, and it will have a direct impact on the issues that he raises.
Before we give Prime Minister's questions, I'm delighted to welcome in the gallery the Speaker of the Lok Sabha of India. Right, let us move to questions to the Prime Minister. Neil Coyle.
Number one, please, Mr. Speaker.
Prime Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. May I wish all members of this House a Happy New Year. Mr. Speaker, our thoughts, of course, are with those affected by the recent flooding, and we thank the responders who are working hard to keep communities safe. Mr. Speaker, this week we published our elective reform plan to rebuild our NHS and end the Tory backlog. We will deliver where the previous government failed, empowering patients, boosting productivity, more care in the community and incentivising reform. Mr. Speaker, this morning I had meetings with ministerial colleagues and others, in addition to my duties in this House. I shall have further such meetings later today.
On behalf of everyone in Southwark, and I hope the whole House, can I offer the Prime Minister condolences on the loss of his brother over Christmas? I wish everyone a Happy New Year. Last July, the public overwhelmingly backed Labour's manifesto commitment to halving violence against women and girls. Can the Prime Minister set out how today's vote on the Children's Wellbeing Bill is a crucial step to delivering that promise to protecting children and without the delay of an unnecessary further lengthy inquiry?
Can I thank him for his remarks about my brother and the other colleagues who've sent me remarks. Mr. Speaker, he raises a very important issue. Violence against women and girls, abuse, child sexual exploitation are sickening. Many victims have been let down for a very long time by warped ideas about community relations and the protection of institutions. Mr. Speaker, he raises the question of inquiries. There have been a number of inquiries, both national and local, including one covering Oldham, and reasonable people can agree or disagree on whether a further inquiry is necessary. This morning I met some of the victims and survivors of this scandal, and they were clear with me that they want action now, not the delay of a further inquiry. The J inquiry, the last national inquiry, was 7 years, which would take us with a further inquiry to 2031. I think action is what's required. But whatever your view, whatever anyone's view on whether a further inquiry is needed, what I find shocking is that anyone in this House would vote down the Children's Wellbeing Bill this afternoon, which is vital protections for the most vulnerable in our society. And I urge the Leader of the Opposition to withdraw her wrecking amendment.
Leader of the Opposition, Kemi Badenoch.
Mr. Speaker, the whole House has heard that the Prime Minister lost his brother during the Christmas period. So can I offer him, on behalf of my party, our sincerest condolences? The new year has started with a focus on the decades-long rape gang scandal. Across the country, thousands of girls were tortured and sexually abused at the hands of men who treated them as things to be used and disposed of, destroying many lives forever. The Prime Minister has mentioned previous inquiries. He is right. There has been an inquiry into child sexual abuse, but it wasn't about the rape gang scandal. In its 468 pages, it mentioned Rotherham just once. Is the Prime Minister confident that we know the full extent of rape gang activity?
Prime Minister.
Can I first thank her for her condolences, and can I thank her for reaching out over the Christmas period when I lost my brother? I really did appreciate that, and I appreciate it today. Mr. Speaker, on the question of a further inquiry, there have been a number of inquiries, some of them localised, including the Mayor of Manchester's inquiry recently, and of course a national inquiry Professor Jay carried out took 7 years, had 20 recommendations, none of which actually were implemented by the party opposite when they were in government. Now, this is a really serious issue. We must focus, obviously, on the victims and survivors. There's no fixed view on the victims and survivors about a further national inquiry. There are mixed views. But there is a view, and I share this view, that what is needed now is action on what we already know. We already know, myself from personal knowledge when I was Chief Prosecutor, that warped ideas, myths and stereotypes about victims were at the heart of this. We've known that for a decade. The Jay report called for mandatory reporting. I called for it 11 years ago. What we need now is action. What can't be tolerated is the idea that this afternoon members opposite will vote down a bill which protects children, include Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, let me just. One of the provisions in the bill is to protect children vulnerable today who are out of school to prevent abusers ever taking those children out of school. I implore members opposite to defy the misleading leadership of the Leader of the Opposition and vote for a really important bill.
Mr. Speaker, I'm shocked that the Prime Minister would say that actions were not taken. He knows full well that we accepted 18. He knows full well that we accepted 18 of the 20 recommendations in the Jay inquiry and went further, launching a gangs task force that found 550 more perpetrators. That shows that there is still work to be done. In Rotherham alone, there have been over 1,400 victims. Across Oldham, Bradford, Bristol, Rochdale, and dozens more towns, there have been thousands more victims, but no one has joined the dots. No one has the total picture, and it is almost certainly still going on. One victim from Telford, and I know he says that victims have different views. We have different views across this House. But one victim from Telford says she wants a national inquiry because it will hold people accountable in a way that previous inquiries have not. It is very possible to have actions, take on more, and still have a national inquiry. So why won't he listen to victims and launch a national inquiry which would have the power to summon witnesses and make them give evidence under oath?
Mr. Speaker, she says they accepted the recommendations. They didn't act on them. Exactly. One of the central recommendations was mandatory reporting, and it still hasn't been enacted. I called for this 11 years ago. They've been tweeting and talking. We've been acting. Well, Mr. Speaker, the Leader of the Opposition has been an MP, I think, for 8 years. Her party have been in government for 7.5 of those 8 years. She was the Children's Minister. She was the Women's and Equalities Minister. I can't remember her, I can't recall her once raising this issue in the House, once calling for a national inquiry. It's only in recent days she's jumped on the bandwagon. Now, Mr. Speaker, in fairness, if I'm wrong about that, and she has raised it, then I invite her to say that now, and I will happily withdraw the remark that she hasn't raised it in this House in the 8 years that she's been here until today.
Kemi Badenoch.
Mr. Speaker, the Prime Minister is being very specific because I have raised this issue. I've raised it in speeches, I've raised it publicly. He knows that as a minister, I would not have been speaking on this specific issue. I was not a Home Office minister, but Mr. Speaker, I will remind him about other victims who came to me who I did help. The victims of the Tavistock scandal who came to me as a minister. I didn't send them away like his safeguarding minister. I made sure, as his Labour Party were calling me transphobic, that we launched the CAS review, which even his health secretary has accepted. So we do right by victims, Mr. Speaker. The reason why a national inquiry is important is because this issue is systemic. It has been involving local and national officials, the police, prosecutors, and politicians. He talks about some of the local inquiries, but these interlinked issues cannot be covered by local inquiries alone. In fact, the leaders of the Manchester inquiry resigned because they couldn't get evidence, they couldn't summon witnesses, and not a single person in a position of authority has been held to account. The Prime Minister called for 9 inquiries in the last Parliament. Does he not see that by resisting this one, people will start to worry about a cover-up?
Mr. Speaker, this is an important issue, and we have to focus on the victims and survivors, and it isn't helpful. This sort of lies and misinformation and slinging of mud doesn't help them one bit. Doesn't help one bit. Mr. Speaker, she raised a question of a victim with me, and quite right to, and I accept that victims and survivors are in different places on this. Those that I've spoken to are worried about the delay of a further inquiry. The last inquiry took 7 years. That would take us to 2031. Now, these inquiries, amongst the issues that's been raised with me, and if she's been speaking to victims, they'll have raised this with her, is that it's very hard for victims and survivors to come forward to explain what's happened to them. They do not want to be rushed through this process, which is why the last one took 7 years. It's not sensible to suggest that this can be done in a hurry, on the cheap, and comprehensively. Therefore, Mr. Speaker, that would take us to, let's say, 2030, 2031. The victims that I've spoken to want action today. I agree with them on that. But what I don't understand, I genuinely don't understand, is why anybody today would vote against the Children Wellbeing Bill, which will protect children who are vulnerable today. It will kill the bill. It will stop those provisions for children exposed at risk today. I implore them, vote for the bill. Don't wreck this in this misguided way.
Mr. Speaker, it is very possible to have shorter inquiries, especially if they are covering areas that have not been looked at yet. We don't need to repeat the work that has already been done. Let's look at new areas. Former Labour MP Anne Pryor said that there were councillors and MPs all over the country who knew what was going on but were terrified of being labelled racist. A national inquiry would ask if there was a racial or cultural motivation to some of these crimes where white girls were seen, as Jack Straw said, as easy meat. The member for Rotherham was sacked from Labour's front bench for speaking out about rape gangs. Does the Prime Minister now recognise that sacking people for telling the truth creates a chilling effect that means victims aren't listened to?
Well, I'm very happy to call out anybody who hasn't acted properly in these cases. I've done it many, many times before, and it doesn't matter to me which political party they're in. I'll call them out and I will condemn them. Mr. Speaker, when I was Chief Prosecutor, I took measures to confront this head-on. The first of the mass prosecutions for an Asian gang was in Rochdale. My team came to see me. It put a number of Asian men in the dock. They wanted the green light for the first of these cases to take place. I gave that green light, but on one condition, because it came to my attention that one of the men that was going into the dock had previously been arrested but not charged. And I said, you can bring the first of these mass prosecutions, but only if you look back at the file where we weren't charged and tell me what went wrong with a report so that I can start to put it right. And that's what started the reforms I brought about. So that's the approach I took in practice, whilst others were tweeting and talking. It's the approach I would take now in any case where there's wrongdoing here. But what we've got to do now, Professor Jay has said this, we have had a number of strong findings. There are 20 on the table from Professor Jay. We've got to get on with action. Don't block it this afternoon.
Mr. Speaker, we need to focus on what this is really about. This is not about the Prime Minister's work in the CPS. And I would say very respectfully to the Prime Minister, it's not about you, it is about the victims. Be a leader, not a lawyer. We know that people were scared to tell the truth because they thought they would be called racist. If we want to stop this from ever happening again, we cannot be afraid. The Labour Party has adopted the APPG definition of Islamophobia. That same APPG report said talking about sex groomers was an example of Islamophobia. This is exactly why people are scared to tell the truth. And the lack of clarity means that innocent British Muslims are smeared by association. That is not fair, and only a national inquiry can solve this. So will the Prime Minister look again at the Labour Party's adoption of the definition of Islamophobia, its chilling effect, and rule out introducing it in government?
Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, I will call out any aspect that has prevented anybody coming forward or any case going forward when it comes to violence against women and girls, child abuse or child sexual exploitation, as I have been doing now for the best part of 15 years. But, yes, some people will say there should be a further inquiry. But that does, I accept that, but that means all the victims and survivors who are going to give evidence need to be in a position to do so. Not all of them are. I've been speaking to them. There are some that do think they are. It will take time. All of the institutions will have to give evidence. That will take time. This will delay things till 2031 also. But Mr. Speaker, we already know what the major flaws are. And my argument is we should get on with that action. And that's why we're bringing forward the bill this afternoon.
Kemi Badenoch.
Mr. Speaker, the Prime Minister has effectively told us that he's not able to do two things at the same time. This issue of a delay is a weak excuse, and I would say to him that by refusing this inquiry, he is enabling those people who wish to smear all British Muslims based on the actions of a small minority. He is talking about distraction tactics. Let us have the truth. The Prime Minister cannot tell the House the full scale of the scandal. He doesn't want questions asked of Labour politicians who may be complicit. He won't listen to the victims. He won't listen to the victims who are calling for a national inquiry. He is making this all about a bill this afternoon. Later today, he will tell Labour MPs, including in Telford, Rochdale, Bristol, Derby, Aylesbury, Oldham, Bradford, Peterborough, Coventry, Middlesbrough, Newcastle, Ramsgate, to tell all of these people to vote against a national inquiry into the gangs which have systematically gang raped children in their constituencies. This is one of the worst scandals in British history, Mr. Speaker.
Sorry? This is a very, very important issue that does matter to the country. It matters to all our constituents. I want to make sure they can hear what's being said by the Leader of the Opposition and the Prime Minister of the Opposition.
Mr. Speaker, this is one of the worst scandals in recent British history. But how are they going to explain to their constituents that obeying his whip is more important than doing the right thing?
She's right to say it's one of the worst scandals. It's terrible. That's why I acted on it. Her recently acquired view that it's a scandal, having spent a lot of time on social media over Christmas, not once in 8 years did she stand here and say what she's just said. Not once in 8 years. They didn't act on the recommendations. They want a national inquiry. We had a national inquiry, the J inquiry, the J report. 20 recommendations, not a single one implemented. Not a single one implemented. And she said you can do two things at once. You can't kill the bill this afternoon, wreck that bill, and protect children. Mr. Speaker, there was a dreadful case of Sarah Sharif that everybody will remember. This was the girl taken out of school and abused by an abuser. The bill this afternoon fixes that gap. And I know, I'm looking across, I know there are honourable members on the benches opposite who know very well that what's in this bill is necessary, that it's the right thing to do, and that would want to vote for this bill. I urge them to think twice about following this short-sighted, misguided, bandwagon-jumping approach of the non-leadership of the Leader of the Opposition. I urge them I urge them to.
Speaker, my constituent, Anne-Marie, and countless other armed forces families across Aldershot and Farnborough are living in shabby military accommodation that simply isn't good enough after 14 years of Conservative neglect. So can I welcome the Ministry of Defence plan to buy back thousands of homes in my constituency? And will the Prime Minister set out how sorting out this bad deal left behind by a past Tory government will make life better for Anne-Marie and others like her living in the home of the British Army?
Prime Minister.
Can I thank her for her question? And we all owe extraordinary debt of thanks to those who serve. Mr. Speaker, by reacquiring over 36,000 service family homes, including 1,700 in my honourable friend's constituency, we can rapidly transform substandard accommodation. The deal that we've done also saves the taxpayer around £230 million per year in rent, and of course it follows the largest pay rise for the armed forces in over 20 years. There is of course still work to do, but this is a major step forward.
We now come to the Leader of the Liberal Democrats, Red Davey.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and Happy New Year to you. And can I join others by offering my personal condolences to the Prime Minister on the loss of his brother? And can I take this opportunity to express my sadness at the passing of a much-loved member of the Liberal Democrat family, Baroness Jenny Randerson. Mr. Speaker, fixing the care crisis is urgent. For the millions of people, elderly and disabled, who are not getting the care they need, for the millions of family carers who are making huge sacrifices to fill the gap, for the NHS, where over 12,000 people are stuck in hospital beds because they can't get out of hospitals, the care is not there for them. The Prime Minister is right to say we need a cross-party approach today, but as Sir Andrew Dillot has said today, that needn't take 3 years. So will the Prime Minister please speed up this work so 2025 is the year we finally rise to the challenge of fixing care?
Prime Minister.
I thank him for raising this important issue and thank him for his condolences. Yes, it is right we need to get this right. I'm on a cross-party consensus on this and invite him to work with us on this, as I know he will. But it is important, and he's right to say we need some action now as well. And that is why it's important I point out the immediate action that we've taken, the £3.7 billion of additional funding in the budget for social care, another £86 million to allow 7,800 more disabled and elderly people to live more independent lives, and of course the increased carers allowance. And the way in which we've set this up is in stages so that we can act and improve as we go along, but making sure that we've got consensus for the bigger changes that may be proposed in the review. And I do invite him and members across the House to work with us on this so that we can get this right and make sure that what we put in place endures beyond just a few years. Thank you.
Red David.
Mr. Speaker, I'm afraid if the government doesn't bring in these long-term social care reforms this year, their NHS reforms, this Parliament will fail. So I hope he will revisit the timetable. But moving on, Mr. Speaker, while the honourable member for Clacton may miss out on his big allowance from Elon Musk, the spectre of the richest man in the world trying to buy a British political party should give us all pause for thought. And after years of the Conservatives taking millions in pounds of Russian money, will the Prime Minister now work with us to bring in long overdue reforms of party funding so that power in this country lies with the voters and not wealthy overseas oligarchs?
I think we all had a smile on Sunday when the honourable member said how cool it was to have the support of Musk, only for Musk to say he should be removed. Just a few hours later, that's the rough and tough of politics. And of course, we're looking at the question of funding more generally.
Cam Joseph.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I welcome the efforts this Labour government has made to reset our relationship with the European Union and to seek to remove unnecessary trade barriers. The trading links between the UK and mainland Europe are of particular importance to my constituency of Ashford. So would the Prime Minister support my efforts and those of other Kent colleagues to restore international train service to Ashford International Station that will help economic growth in my constituency, Kent, and wider South East?
Prime Minister.
Right. Thank my honourable friend for raising this question. Businesses in his constituents have been badly let down by the deal of the last government, and we, of course, are resetting and strengthening that relationship on the economy, on energy, on security to deliver the growth that we need. I know this is an issue of considerable frustration to his constituents. The decision in question, Mr Speaker, is ultimately for Eurostar, but we are keen to see international services reinstated to Ashford as soon as possible, and I would be happy for the Rail Minister to update him on the latest discussions.
Stephen Flynn.
Mr Speaker, can I begin by doing something unusual, which is to commend the Prime Minister on his earlier answers to the Leader of the Opposition and, of course, to pass on my party's condolences to him for the loss of his brother. Outside of this place, temperatures continue to plummet, energy bills continue to rise, and the winter fuel allowance has been unacceptably taken away from so many vulnerable pensioners. Now, the Prime Minister intimated prior to Christmas that he had no regrets about any of the decisions that he has taken in office. Does he understand that the public do?
Prime Minister.
I thank him for his condolences. We took some tough decisions. They led to a budget which delivered the largest settlement since devolution began to Scotland. If he thinks we should now reverse that, then he should say so. What it's done is it's given the money, so now the SNP have the money, they have the power, and no more excuses for the non-delivery that we see in Scotland. If he wants me to reverse that, he should say so.
Sam Rushworth.
Mr Speaker. Feeling safe in your own community is among the most basic of human needs, but after 14 years of Tory cuts to Durham's frontline police and breaking the criminal justice system, too many of my constituents are victims of violence, theft and antisocial behaviour, and these crimes too often go unpunished. Now, I know the Prime Minister's had a lifelong commitment to protecting victims, so what assurances can the Prime Minister give my constituents that our new government will be tough on crime and on the causes of crime?
Mr Speaker, he's right to raise this important issue, and I have to say, when he said there were cuts to polices and somebody said boring, I think that somebody opposite just did boring. That tells you everything you need to know about the last 14 years. He's right. We need to crack down on those committing vile acts in our communities, and that's why our plan for change puts 13,000 extra police and PCSO officers into neighbourhood policing, 3.5% real terms increase, and of course tough new respect orders. Where they lost control, we'll take back control and deliver safe and secure communities.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My constituent Dipak first opened the doors to his pharmacy in 1991, and he's been serving the Chelmsford community ever since, greeting many of his patients by name. But Dipak's business is struggling. His NHS contract no longer covers the cost of the drugs he has to dispense. For example, he's sometimes been forced to pay over 100 times more for a particular mental health drug than his contract provides. Dipak is dipping into his life savings to keep his pharmacy afloat, and I'm sure that many other pharmacists across the country are doing the same. Does the Prime Minister agree with me that no pharmacist should be forced to use their own money to keep their pharmacy viable?
Prime Minister.
Can I thank her for raising this really important and challenging case? Community pharmacists like Dipak play a vital role in our health service. And as she knows, the Department of Health and Social Care sets drug tariff prices and regularly assesses what pharmacies are reimbursed to ensure overall they're paid fairly. If she would prepare to share the details further with me, I will look and have a review by the team of the particular case that she's raised with me. Thank you.
Mark Seward.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Last year, I was honoured to accept an invitation from the European Jewish Association to go to Krakow and discuss the role of Holocaust education in tackling the rising tide of anti-Semitism across Europe. We also visited Auschwitz and Auschwitz-Birkenau, where we laid wreaths and paid tributes to the many victims of the Holocaust. Given that this month marks the 80th anniversary of the liberation of those evil places, will the Prime Minister set out what this government is doing on Holocaust education to ensure that never again means never again?
Minister.
Well, I thank him for raising this. Anti-Semitism is completely abhorrent and has no place whatsoever in our society. Mr. Speaker, I recently met with Jewish community leaders in Downing Street to discuss what further we can do to combat anti-Semitism, and that includes allocating £54 million for the Community Security Trust to continue their vital work, committing to building a new Holocaust Memorial and Learning Centre, and providing at least £2.2 million to continue the funding lessons from Auschwitz. And I look forward to working with others on those important proposals.
Victoria Collins.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Businesses like Hicks in Harpenden, charities like the Hospice of St Francis in Berkhamsted, health and social care providers like the Elms Medical Practice in Harpenden, a GP, are amongst those up and down this country who are warning the government about the negative impact of the proposed changes to national insurance contributions. When will the Prime Minister heed those warnings and, at the very least, look at exemptions for health and social care providers like they have for the NHS?
Prime Minister.
Thank you for raising this. Look, we had to deliver a budget to wipe the slate clean and to deliver the stable basis for our economy and at the same time repair our public services. That's why we invested £25.6 billion over 2 years in the NHS, including additional funding for GPs and for hospices. And we are taking measures to ensure that funding is there to support our vital services.
Mr. Speaker, every week I visit constituents in my Hackney South and Shoreditch constituency living in the most appalling, overcrowded social housing, some with triple bunk beds in the bedroom and the parents on a sofa bed in the living room. The nearest available property to buy would be £500,000, and it's out of the reach for these hard-working families. I really welcome our government's commitment to 1.5 million new homes. Will the Prime Minister agree that we need clear targets for the number of social housing units so that families in Hackney can live in dignity?
Prime Minister.
I'm grateful to her for raising this, and she describes an appalling situation when it comes to housing, and one will be familiar to a number of MPs on both sides of the House. And that's why we will deliver the 1.5 million homes that we desperately need across the country. She's right, and the budget announced 500 million into the Affordable Homes programme, which is hugely important, 100 million of that going to the Greater London Authority. And we will also, Mr. Speaker, reform the right to buy to deliver a fairer, better value, a more sustainable scheme where long-standing tenants can buy their own home.
Andrew George.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. In Cornwall, in the last 10 years, over £500 million has been handed to holiday homeowners through various tax loopholes, etc., whilst local families are being evicted from their homes to make way for yet more holiday homes as the housing crisis deepens and worsens. The 6 MPs in Cornwall are determined to reverse this situation and to address these issues before the end of this Parliament. Will the Prime Minister agree to meet us so we get the full backing of government and deliver first rather than second homes for the good of Cornwall and the Isles of Scilly?
Prime Minister.
I thank you for raising this. We are committed to building those 1.5 million homes, and that includes 4,500 new homes every year in Cornwall. But I do recognise the point he makes, which is that excessive concentrations of short-term lets and second homes in places like Cornwall can impact the availability and affordability of homes. That's why we'll enable councils to charge a premium on the council tax bills of second homes, abolish the furnished homes let regime and introduce a registration scheme for short-term lets. But I am happy to make sure that he and his Cornish colleagues do get the meeting they want with the Housing Minister to discuss that further.
Joyce Benton-Glenn.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. This government is committed to using the criminal justice system to tackle violence against women and girls. But when an abuser can use a child custody battle to continue their abuse, as happened in the case of one of my constituents, it's clear that we need to raise the issue in the civil courts too. Will the Prime Minister please look at ending the absurd assumption that a domestic abuser's involvement in a child's life is advantageous to their welfare?
Prime Minister.
Yeah, absolutely, and he's right, Mr. Speaker. Family courts must never be a tool that domestic abusers can use to continue their appalling abuse, and that's why we're expanding the number of new Pathfinder courts to provide dedicated support to survivors and protect the welfare of children. We are reviewing the presumption of parental involvement and will set out our position in due course. And I'll make sure that he meets the relevant minister to discuss this further.
Christine Jolly.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. And can I associate myself with the remarks of the Liberal Democrat leader and others today? Happy New Year to everyone, but 2025 is already proving a challenge for many of my constituents. Pensioners, families, small businesses, the hospitality industry, GPs, social care, as others have said. They know that the SNP has failed to deliver for Scotland. They hear when the Prime Minister says that the Conservatives left the economy in a mess, and they know that governments make difficult decisions. But what they are asking me is, when is this government going to do something positive for them to overcome the negative impacts they're facing from the budget?
Prime Minister.
Thank you very much. Can I just address something I should have addressed to our leader, which is to express our condolences about Jenny Randerson. I apologise, I overlooked that earlier on. She raises the point about the failure of the SNP and the legacy of the Tories, and I'm proud that this Labour government delivered the largest budget settlement for Scotland since devolution, and that means, Mr. Speaker, in answer to a question, 100,000 workers in Scotland benefit from the increases from the national minimum and living wage each year. An estimated 3.2 million people in Scotland will benefit from the extension of the 5p cut in fuel duty. And it comes, of course, on top of the 125 million to set up Great British Energy in Aberdeen. And it reinforces the point. They've got the powers, but a terrible record. They left a terrible legacy. We're getting on for delivering for Scotland.
Last year, this Labour government delivered justice for members of the Mine Workers Pension Scheme. 45,000 members of the similar British Coal Staff Superannuation Scheme are keen to see their £2.3 billion investment reserve returned to them, which could boost coalfield communities like mine in Cannock Chase. Will the Prime Minister meet with retired miners, trustees and coalfield MPs to discuss what could be done for BCSS members up and down the country?
Prime Minister.
Right, thank you for raising this issue. I was pleased, Mr. Speaker, that the first increased payments to Mine Workers Scheme members were made at the end of November. I do understand the strong feeling on the British Coal Staff Superannuation Scheme, which is why the Minister for Industry met the trustees last year, and we will be working with the coal staff trustees to consider their proposals once the new Mine Workers Pension Scheme arrangements have been agreed.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, first of all, we had a Chancellor who embellished her CV, then we had a Transport Secretary with a fraud conviction, and now we've got an anti-corruption minister who is being investigated for corruption. Now, I know the Prime Minister likes living in free accommodation, but does he really think it's appropriate that his minister is being given free housing by the political allies of some very dubious foreign regimes?
Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, the City Minister has acted appropriately by referring herself to the independent adviser. We brought in our new ministerial code to allow ministers to ask to establish the facts, and I'm not going to give a running commentary on that important exercise.
Tonia Antoniazzi.
The last couple of days, I wrote to the England and Wales Cricket Board regarding the upcoming game in the Championship Trophy against Afghanistan on the 26th of February. I have met with the ECB and we are calling for the game to be boycotted. I thank everybody for the support that I've had across this House and also at the other place. I also would like to thank very much the Prime Minister for his intervention with the International Cricket Council yesterday. But would he please agree to meet and talk to his counterparts in South Africa and Australia that they boycott the Games as well?
Mr. Speaker, there's been an appalling erosion of the rights of women and girls in Afghanistan, and we all should condemn that suppression of freedoms in the strongest terms, and that's why we provided additional aid, at least 50% of which we're going to women and girls. DCMS are in touch with the international counterparts on this issue. I welcome the England and Wales Cricket Board making strong representations to the International Cricket Council on Afghanistan's women's cricket team.
Final question, Sir Roger Gale.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Mr. Speaker, setting aside the matter of grooming gangs, the opposition amendment on the order paper today sets out very clearly why the bill that we shall be debating is so very deeply flawed. And if it is to become an Act of Parliament, it will have to be completely rewritten in committee. But, Mr. Speaker, the Prime Minister from that dispatch box has made much of his service as the public prosecutor. So could he tell the House in that capacity why during his time he declined to instigate a prosecution for rape and sexual abuse against Mohammed Fayed?
Prime Minister.
That case never crossed my desk.
Right. That completes Prime Minister's question. Point of order, Paul Holmes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. On a point of order, during an answer about police numbers, the Prime Minister said that someone on this side of the House shouted boring. Can I correct the record following a request from Hansard that I actually said bingo because of repetitive and overused cliches that the Prime Minister was using during PMQs?
Well, I would say you've corrected the record. The thing is, I wouldn't have owned up in the way you did, but there we are. Let us move on. Right, let us come to the 10-minute rule bill. Rupert Lowe.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I beg to move that leave be given to bring in a bill to prohibit